Well, hello Friday. The opening chart I've put up because it's colourful. It's from Calculated Risk, the same stable as the Joker chart and many other spankingly good exhibitions of chart porn. What he's trying to say here is the blue sticky down ones and sticky up ones are the amount of GDP that comes into or is taken away from the US GDP, as in if residential is doing badly, it takes from the GDP number. And as you can see, through 2006, 7, 8 and a bit of 9, it changed over in 2009. It was awful sticky down. That was taking an awful lot out of the GDP number, making the GDP number go negative if anything was. But in a way, balancing that up with the red sticky up ones, which was state and local government, which was still spending positively into the economy and making GDP go up. And that ran on until the middle of 2009 when that changed. What looks like it's happened in 2009, early 2010, is that the state and local amount of spending has gone down. State and local always used to be adding positively to the US GDP number, but in mid-2009 it started going negative and went negative and is still negative. Residential started coming up again from its base of really taking away a lot of negative to every now and then putting in positive appearances at the end of 2010 and has been positive all through 2011 and 12. Residential is now adding to US GDP again, which is very positive. And you can see the state of the state and local spending where it was down at its lowest at the end of 2010 and early 2011. Ever since then, in quarter 2 of 2011, quarter 3 of 2011, and right up to now, it's getting smaller and smaller and is basically just about flat now. State and local is not taking from US GDP. State and local spending is coming back, and with residential spending already back, that is good news for the number, which is US GDP. Right, the next one I want to go to is the Japanese story that I didn't do yesterday, but I thought I'd slip in. I don't have an image for it. A bit of information on leverage, which came up in comments yesterday. How much has it been a cause of the great problem that went on or is going on? An awful lot is the answer. Bank leverage it made the banks vulnerable, and the other banks knew that the other banks were vulnerable because they knew that they were vulnerable because of their high leverage to various strange products like mortgage-backed securities, but the leverage was there to make them vulnerable, and it was that stopped them lending to each other because they knew each other had the similar sort of problems that they had. Okay, so what is this leverage or bank leverage that people go on about 30 or 40 to 1 for banks like, well, all banks now really, but they say that Lehman was 40 to 1 and things like that. But Lehman was 40 to 1, but you can guarantee Citi was 40 to 1 as well, somewhere up in that sort of range. And it just so happened that Lehman went down because they had a more... It's too complicated. We're not going into that here. So leverage, what is it? It isn't like yesterday where I can just go to Investopedia and give you the dictionary definitions, because on different occasions and different an investment banker would give you a different definition of leverage to an accountant, and an accountant would just ask you, well, what rules are appropriate here for what leverage they're talking about when they say 40 to 1. Well, what do you mean? And it gets complicated, so I'll just give you a mystic view of it. But think of it this way. If a bank gives somebody a mortgage and they pay the mortgage back, when they're paying the interest back to the bank, that is the bank's money. That is the bank's own money, the interest that's paid to them. Yeah, that's the way. That's a good way to think about it. As I say, it's no dictionary definition, but it should work as a mystic definition. The interest paid is the bank's money. It pays its wages with that interest money, but also it can make bets with that money. Say it's paid all the wages and all the other overheads, and it's got some money left over, which is its money, and it wants to make an easy bet. Let's say buy a treasury bond. So with that money, it buys a treasury bond. But as you know, the interest rate on treasury bonds is very small, and the bank's not going to make much money. So it would make a lot more money making a safe bet like a treasury bond if it borrowed money or used other people's money. Yeah, I'll just use other people's money. Now, I'm going to... should I leave aside completely? Yeah, because I've got the Japan one to go. I'll leave aside completely where they get the other money from. But suffice to say, it's money that they have to pay back. So any money that they have to pay back, like a deposit that you've got in the bank, or a bondholder that's lent the bank money, the bond has to be paid back. So it's their money temporarily, but on the books, it's on the liability side because the bank is liable to pay that money back. So if it makes a bet with that type of money, that is leveraging up. So if, say, it buys... Let's go to straight up to the... I think 33 to 1 is going to be slightly easier in the long run than 40 to 1. So let's say 33 to 1. So the bank uses one of its own money, and I don't know if it's going to actually be 32 or 33, but let's say, and then it uses 33% of OPM, other people's money. It's then leveraged 33 to 1. So it's made a bet, whatever the bet is that it's going to hold on its asset side. It's made that bet with one of its own money and 33 of other people's money. So to get an idea of the importance of this in the overall picture, now we'll have the bank makes the bet with 3 of its own money, and see, this is where I didn't know it was going to be 32 or 33. It makes 97 of the other people's money. So 3 are its own, 97 are of other people's, which is about 33 to 1 leverage. So I'm just making it up to 100, obviously. So it's 3 making 3 to 97, which is about 1 to 33. So that's the bet. And it can be, well, you can imagine it as an individual bet, or all the assets, all the bets put together, making up 100%. Now, think of it as one bet. That whole overall, all of the bets that they've made is, just think of it as one bet. So they've made one bet. Now, if that bet loses, say, 1% over a period of time, 1% is, okay, it comes out of the bank's 3. Because you can't say, oh, well, the person that you borrowed the money from, you can't say, oh, well, you lost that one. The bank must be reasonable and say, oh, bugger, we lost that one. So, and then so that's 1% comes off. So there's 2% safe and 97% safe. So the bet goes even further wrong, 2%, 3% wrong. It's the bet's lost 3%. Then the bank has lost all its money. The 97 is still safe because the overall bet, the 100%, has only lost 3%. So the 97% is still safe. But the day the bet loses its 4%, that is coming out of other people's money. Now, in an accounting sort of way, that makes the bank not just illiquid, but insolvent. Because the bank's bets are its entire asset side. So if it had to then sell all its bets off, this is what we're saying, all those bets would only add up then to 96. It does not have the last 97 to pay its debts. It's not just illiquid, It's not a problem about selling all the assets. It's a problem that if you sold them at today's market price, they would not get you enough money to pay everyone back. The bank is then not just illiquid, it's insolvent. So this is the problem with leveraging up 33 to 1. It means that if your assets lose just 4%, you are technically insolvent. And that is, you can expect it to happen in major downturns to lose 4% on your entire asset side. And that is what made the banks so vulnerable and not wanting to trade with each other, because they knew in those bets that they had made that among them, let's just say, there was a good bunch of subprime bets of various types and all sorts of bets in there that were a bit dodgy, and it was almost guaranteed that there would be, depending on your amount of leverage, but even a good bank at 25 to 1 leverage would only have to say lose 5%, and still they would be technically insolvent. So anyway, that's leverage. And I just want to finish with this missing the big Japan story. And I'll read it because it could be what we've had over the last, say, 30 years since Volcker and the 80s and inflation is central banks concentrating on inflation targeting. Basically, it was as simple as this. The bank said, as long as we keep inflation to about 2%, still it's a very capitalistic thing, to about 2%, that's our job and that's all we do, keep inflation to about 2%, then the capitalistic world that we live in will be able to flourish in that atmosphere. And that was it. So the central banks since 1980 have concentrated on doing the 2%, relying on the private market to flourish in that milieu, in that atmosphere that the Fed had created. And that's the only thing that the Fed looked upon as its own responsibility, that 2% line. And then it was up to the rest to play in that world and make the most of it. And to a certain extent, the figures showed the Fed that everything was wonderful. They kept to their 2% about, and the world did flourish until it didn't. Okay, missing the big Japan story. The potential exists for groundbreaking changes in Japan's economic policy, and I sense that Western journalists caught up in the current celebration of central bankers are missing the big story. In my opinion, a higher inflation target by the Bank of Japan is not particularly interesting. After all, the Bank of Japan can't hit. You can start listening again now, because I'm sure you didn't listen to the first bit. The Bank of Japan can't hit the current goal of 1% inflation. I don't have much faith that renaming the goal into calling it a target and increasing it to 2% will be like waving a magic wand. But something much more significant is afoot. Much more significant is afoot. The possibility of explicit cooperation, albeit perhaps forced cooperation between fiscal and monetary authorities. Fiscal is the government, monetary is the central bank. The loss of the Bank of Japan's independence to force the direct monetization of deficit spending is the real story. Floyd Norris in the New York Times, you can start listening again. Floyd Norris in the New York Times begins a recent article on Japanese monetary policy with a quote from the Federal Reserve Governor Ben Bernanke. Ben Bernanke quote coming up. I'll do the silly voice, but then probably read it without the silly voice. Under a paper money system, a determined government can always generate higher spending and hence positive inflation. It's an old famous Bernanke speech. Under a paper money system, fiat system, non-gold-backed system, or non-backed system, a determined government can always generate higher spending and hence positive inflation. But note, because you probably didn't note, exactly what Bernanke said there. Under a paper money system, you heard that a determined government, not central bank, a determined government can always generate higher spending and hence positive inflation. The link's there. Read the rest of the article to understand it's not the central bank that can do all this and the inflation stuff. The government's got to be involved. The government's not involved, forget it. You don't get any inflation, you probably get deflation, and it's a whole different story. A determined government can always generate higher spending and hence positive inflation. Goodbye.